it's Paula here, dietitian. My name's Paula Hallam, and here with you on Your Baby Club, and to take all your questions about weaning, starting solids, introducing solids to your baby, any questions you might have about that, about baby nutrition, toddler nutrition, anything like that. So as I said, my name is Paula. I'm a pediatric dietitian, and I have been working as a dietitian with children and families for 20 years now, and I've helped lots and lots of families like yours introduce solids or start weaning with their little one. So let me know if you have any questions about your little one's weaning journey, anything to do with when to start, how to start weaning, how to progress with meals, anything like that, and we can get going with the questions. So I'll be here for the next half hour or so, and then I'm going to be going across to Instagram and answering some questions on there as well. Okay, so great. If you want to look at any of my various posts I've got on weaning, children's nutrition, everything, you can find me either on Facebook or Instagram, and under my business is called Tiny Tots Nutrition, and you'll find lots of useful information, tips, videos, pictures, all sorts of things about food, nutrition, weaning, allergies, all sorts of things like that. So I can see we've got some questions here, so I'll start answering the questions. So it's a question here from someone who's got a 15-month-old. I'm trying to give my 15-month-old more of our meals instead of spoon feeding her all the time. I'm putting some food on her tray so she can feed herself, and also trying some on the spoon, but she's just throwing it on the floor or playing with it. People have told me not to give her other options. She will eat if she's hungry, but some days she hardly eats anything. She'll happily eat her snacks though, or if I give her a rice cake or some chickpea crisps. I'm just ending up throwing so much food, wasted food away. Okay, great. So it's a 15-month-old child. So first thing to say is that over the age of a year, children's appetites do decrease slightly, and that's because their growth actually starts slowing down. So in the first year of life, they have the most rapid time of growth in their life. That time and then adolescent years are the two sort of peak times of growth. So in the first year of life, they triple their birth weight, they have incredibly rapid growth, and that means that drives their hunger and their appetite a lot. Second year of life, there are a couple of things going on. Their growth slows down, and so their appetite definitely starts decreasing, and they also start becoming a bit more independent, autonomous. They want to control things, stamp their personality, and so all those things start coming into play. So 15-month-old throwing of food. So first thing to say, it's completely normal. A lot of the time children do that. I think the first thing to say is to have a regular meal and snack routine. So it sounds like you do that already. So 3 meals and 2 snacks a day would be appropriate for 15-month-old, and having some milk or dairy products as well, but they don't. The one thing I wanted to say is that they don't need a lot of milk. So after the age of a year, calcium requirements decrease, also to do with their because their growth and things slows down. So the first thing I would say, as I said, regular meals and snacks, and then the second thing I would look at is how much milk your baby's drinking. So they shouldn't be drinking more than 300 mils of milk, because that provides all their calcium requirements that they need. If they're also eating yogurt and cheese, they will need even less milk than that. Okay, and the reason we don't want children having too much milk is that it really can fill them up a lot. So milk is, although it's a liquid, it's almost like a food because it's really so filling. So that's the second thing I would look at, is their milk intake. And then I would give them a different option. So in terms of, not a different option in terms of another choice of food, but an alternative to throwing the food. So try and ignore the behavior as much as possible. And then I would put some kind of bowl or plate or something, a small little plate next to your child's own plate, and encourage her to, if she doesn't want something, to put it onto that plate. So food stays on the table, or let's put food on the other plate if you don't want it. So those types of things, and showing and role modeling to her how to do that. We don't throw food, we keep it on the table, those types of things, just to reinforce those things. It's fine for children to, and important for children to get messy and to pick up their food and squish the food in their fingers, and they might play with it a little bit. That's absolutely fine. But in terms of throwing food, having an alternative place for them to place the food can really help with that. So I hope those things help. And having a regular meal and snack structure means that there are lots of opportunities throughout the day, every sort of 2 to 3 hours, for them to have something to eat. And so if they don't eat very much at one meal, that's okay. Don't give them an alternative, just offer them their snack as scheduled 2 or 3 hours later, whenever you've planned that snack. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I'm just seeing some more questions here. Okay, so another one about a toddler. My toddler has always eaten a wide variety of food, but has started refusing foods that she had always eaten. Should I keep offering them? So yes, absolutely, still keep offering them. It's very, very common for children over the age of 1, sometimes 18 months or so, to start refusing foods that they previously did eat. So as I said before, this is them sort of stamping their independence, and often they can become a bit fussy at this age. They're just experimenting with things, and they often, there is something called the neophobic response, which is children in the past used to be sort of fearful of foods or wary of foods that they didn't recognize. So that's when children are sort of reluctant to try new foods. But it's very common for them to start refusing foods that they previously did eat. Babies between the age of 6 and to 12 months are very receptive to new foods and to trying new things. And so that's why it's a really, really important time to introduce lots and lots of variety to your child's diet. But as they get older, still offer them those foods. So even if they're refusing them, still offer them. Eat them yourself, and the rest of the rest of the people in your family eat together as a family. That's really, really important. And keep offering those foods. So even if your child is not eating them. Other ways that could help is away from meal times, having various activities to do with food that doesn't necessarily mean eating the food. So involve your little one in helping prepare foods, cooking foods, peeling foods, washing them, chopping them supervised if they're able to do that. Anything like that, going to a food market, even looking at books with food in them, talking about different foods, the color, the texture, what they look like, what they feel like. All those sorts of things can help familiarize and get children interested in foods without sort of pressurizing them to eat them. Definitely take off the pressure, because the more pressure you apply, more you try to get them to eat things, the less likely they are to do that. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. Definitely keep offering the foods. What feeding schedule should I have for my 8-month-old? She has breakfast and dinner at the moment. She starts her day at 5 a.m. usually, early start, and starts winding down for bed at 6 p.m. When to introduce a third meal? Yeah, so at 8 months old, I say you could definitely introduce a third meal. I usually say by the age of 7 or 8 months to have introduced 3 meals. It depends a little bit when you've started weaning, but I would introduce, so you've got breakfast and dinner there, so I'd introduce a lunchtime meal that doesn't it's usually sort of late morning in babies, depending when they have their nap. So I would definitely introduce a kind of lunchtime meal at around 11:30, depending how that fits in with your baby's sleeping schedule. Okay, so another question here from a baby 7 months. My baby is 7 months old, and no matter what I try, he will not wean. I have tried different spoons, food, and bought 2 different high chairs. I've tried feeding him in different places. I'm really struggling. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, so 7 months old, it's I'm not sure exactly when you started trying to introduce solids, but it's still fairly early in the weaning sort of journey. So I would say don't push it too much. You might need to at 7 months to just to have a little look at, I'm not sure if you're breastfeeding or formula feeding, but just to have a little look at the milk and how much you're offering. Milk and breast milk and formula milk still extremely important at this age. I'm not suggesting, but they might just have to have a look at the when you're offering it, so that the sort of schedule. So try to keep things relaxed, and eat with your baby. So role modeling, they really love copying people, babies, they love copying you. So eat with your baby. Try to keep things relaxed and happy, and maybe leave a little bit of a gap between when you're giving their formula or breast milk to when you're offering the solids. So yeah, so I would say try and if it still carries on and you just your baby doesn't seem happy, or there seems to be something going on, please speak to a health visitor or doctor and see if you need some extra help there. But I would say try not to put too much pressure on, and eat with your baby. Role modeling can really help, because they really like copying you. So watching you eating, and try to keep it as relaxed as possible. Okay, so there's a question here about a little one who is 2 and has suspected autism and ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I'm looking for some advice on making mealtimes easier. Food is limited as everything is refused 90%, 5% of the time. Because of this, I'm up several times at night making bottles of milk. Okay, so for children who've got who are suspected or have autism or ADHD or other sort of behavioral problems, I would really get in touch with a professional. So a dietitian, a speech and language therapist who specializes in feeding, an occupational therapist, a feeding team, because you really might need some extra support in terms of really supporting your little one. So children with autism and ADHD can have other things going on, so it's not just a case of the sort of common fussy eating that we find in a lot of children. So some of those strategies might not be quite appropriate. So I'd really encourage you to get in touch with some professionals and get some specific advice there. It's very difficult for me to give advice about that specific case, so I hope that's helpful. I know it's really difficult. You say you're tearing your hair out. I'm so sorry to hear that. But yeah, I'd really get some support. Speak to your health visitor, ask if there's a feeding team in your area, or anyone that you could contact in a feeding team. A feeding team usually involves a speech and language therapist who's had extra training in feeding, because they look at the oromotor skills in terms of the muscles that are used around the mouth and in the mouth and swallowing, and textures and all that side of things. An occupational therapist, because they look at the sensory side of things. So often children with ADHD and autism can have certain issues with different senses. They can be really sensitive to things, how the things touch, how things smell, all those types of things. And then a dietitian could obviously look at all the nutrition side of things. So I'd really encourage you to try and get in touch with a feeding team. Okay, so I have another question here. This is great. Thanks for all the questions coming in. So a question here about a 10-month-old baby. My 10-month-old is showing no signs of wanting to wean. She can't eat anything with a lump as she gags and chokes. I brought it up with her health visitor and she suggests swallow problem, but I think it is just the feel of the texture. What can I do? Okay, so really good question. We know that with babies up until the age of about 9 or 10 months, there is a real window there in terms of offering things that have got slightly more texture. So the older your baby gets, the harder it is to introduce lumpier textures. So I'm not saying you're not going to be able to introduce to your 10-month-old baby, but we do know that there is kind of a window with textures, and that after the age of 10, 11, and 12 months, if they're still on very smooth purees, it can be very, very difficult to introduce lumps. So what I would, first of all, the thing I would say is that gagging is not the same as choking. So some gagging in babies, particularly when they start weaning, is totally normal. So gagging is a gag reflex is to protect the airway. So if your baby has a lump or something that goes down and they feel like it's going down the wrong way, they will cough, they might go a bit red, their eyes might water, and they will sort of cough up that lump that's still in their mouth if they can't deal with it, or they will swallow it themselves. Sometimes, for reasons we're not totally sure of, some babies seem to have an extremely sensitive gag reflex, particularly babies who've had reflux in the past. They seem to be extremely sensitive to any lumps in their mouth. The gag reflex is more sensitive in children, in babies generally, than adults. So you know, as an adult, it's only if something's right at the back of your throat that you sort of start gagging on that. But with babies, their gag reflex is much further forwards, more like the middle of the tongue, and that's to protect them, so that foods or different objects don't block the airway. So choking is different. So choking is when the airway is completely blocked off and your baby will not cough, they will not make a sound, they will start going blue around the mouth, and they need some kind of intervention. And first aid course is really, really important to know how to deal with choking. But what I wanted to point out is that gagging is totally different to choking, and some gagging is absolutely normal. But it sounds like in this baby who's 10 months old that they maybe have quite a sensitive gag reflex, and that any kind of lump makes them gag. So there are a few things that you can do. So your health visitor said that it could be something to do with the swallow problem. So if you do think there's any issue with textures or swallowing, then it might be worth speaking to a speech and language therapist who has a extra training in feeding, because they can look at your baby's swallow, your baby's oromotor skills, so all using the muscles around the mouth, the tongue, the lips, all the muscles that you use to chew, swallow, deal with lumps. So it might be worth speaking to someone like that. The other thing that can help is teethers, so like silicone teethers that obviously your baby chews down on, and that can help them get used to things in the mouth and can move the gag reflex further back. Also, so things like a teether, toothbrush, anything like that, a sort of silicone type thing. Also, soft finger foods can actually help. Sometimes soft finger foods are better tolerated than purees, sort of smooth purees that have got lumps within them, because a puree with lumps is like a number of textures to deal with, and soft finger foods that soft enough that you can actually squish them between your fingers, and that your baby will be able to mash with their gums or their tongue and the roof of their mouth. Finger foods might be better tolerated than lumps, actually, because if your baby picks it up and puts it in their mouth themselves, they have more control over that than a spoon coming into their mouth. So I'd encourage those self-feeding things as well, using soft finger foods and the teethers. But yeah, if you're worried about any kind of like the feel of the texture, it may be worth speaking to a speech and language therapist specializing in feeding. There's someone that I work closely with, and she's called Stacey Zimmels, and her Facebook and Instagram page is called Feed, Eat, Speak, and you'll find a lot of information on her page about this type of thing, about textures, gag reflex, babies who are stuck on a soft, smooth puree and can't seem to move on from that. You'll find a lot of information on her page. Thickening up the purees, keeping them smooth, but thickening them up first before you sort of start adding lumps can help them move on with these textures as well. So I hope that's helpful. Took a bit of a while to answer that, but there's quite a lot involved in some of these questions. Okay, so there's lots of fussy eater questions today. So there's a question here saying, my 2-year-old has become a fussy eater. She used to eat everything we gave her at home. Now all she eats is pasta, waffles, and meat-free meatballs, but she will happily eat everything the nursery gives her. We are vegetarian, so I always ensure she has some sort of protein on her plate. What can I do? Okay, so that's interesting. It's I hear that a lot from the families that I work with, and I get questions from, that their child often eats better at nursery than at home. So that is very, very common, although obviously it can be extremely frustrating. So the first thing I would say is to have a clear meal and snack structure routine for your 2-year-old. So 3 meals a day and 2 snacks a day are appropriate, and spreading those out throughout the day, with around 2 to 3 hours between each of them. So there's lots of eating opportunities, at least 5 eating opportunities during the day, for your child to have something to eat. So if they've refused something at one meal, there's always something at the next eating opportunity, snack, mini meal that they can have. Okay, so she's very keen on pasta, waffles, and meat-free meatballs. Okay, so those are obviously her favorite foods. There might be some other foods that she also may or doesn't mind eating as well. So what I would say is, at each meal, offer her, it doesn't have to be one of her absolute favorites, but offer her something that she does quite like. You know, she's eaten a lot of in the past, and she's likely to eat it. So maybe that's the pasta, maybe it's different forms of pasta, things like that. So that's what we call the love it food. So this is a technique called love it, like it, learning it. So offer one food that you quite sure she probably most likely will eat, then offer another food that she may or may not eat, and then offer a third food that you know she probably won't eat, but it's important for exposure. So exposure is so important. So try not, even though the pasta, waffles, and meat-free meatballs are her favorite things, try not to only offer her those things. Okay, so it's fine to offer her those things, but offer it with other things. So like I said, offering her those 3 things: food that's a love it food, a like it, and a learning it food, so that your child can see something on the plate, on something on the table that they do like, and they feel comfortable with. Because the last thing you want is your child coming to the table and looking at the food that's available and not seeing anything that they like or anything that they're familiar with, because that increases their feelings of anxiety, and they decreases their appetite, and they're less likely to have anything to eat. The next thing I'll say is, as I mentioned this before in another question, is check how much milk your child is drinking. So a 2-year-old, they don't need that much milk, and often children really enjoy their milk. If they're still having bottles, it's very comforting, and they can get through a lot of milk, which fills them up very, very quickly. So even though milk is a liquid, it's more like a food because it's so filling. So 2-year-old doesn't need more than 300 mils of milk a day. That provides them with all their calcium requirements for the day. So 350 milligrams of calcium a day is their calcium requirements. So even if they're only drinking 100 mils of milk and having a small pot of yogurt and a couple of slices of cheese a day, that will be sufficient for their calcium requirements. So try to make sure that they're not having too much milk. That would be my next tip. Because you're vegetarian, another really, really important thing, I'm sure you're aware of this, is to offer enough iron-rich foods. And with vegetarian families, I advise that they give their baby or child an iron-rich food at every meal. So normally I would recommend at least 2 of the 3 meals a day be an iron-rich food. So that's if you include meat as well. But a vegetarian family, because the vegetarian sources of iron aren't absorbed quite as well as the animal sources, it's important to offer iron-rich foods 3 times a day. So vegetarian iron-rich sources of food would include things like eggs, beans, lentils, pulses, chickpeas, nut butters and ground nuts and ground seeds, things like that. Also fortified breakfast cereals like Weetabix, Ready Break, things like that are fortified with iron and also a very, very good source of iron. Also some dried fruits, particularly things like apricots, are quite good sources of iron as well. I have a information sheet on iron-rich foods on my Instagram page. If you have a look back for that, you should find it, or otherwise just drop me a message on Instagram for that. Okay, I've just got another couple of minutes, so I hope that's helpful. So the reason I mention iron is because the family is vegetarian, but also iron deficiency can affect children's appetites. It can really decrease the child's appetite and put them off their food, so it can be quite a vicious cycle if they are drinking lots and lots of milk, not eating that much food, not eating much iron-rich food, becoming more iron deficient, less of an appetite, and then the sort of cycle goes round. So I'm not saying your child is iron deficient, it's just one thing to think about. So I hope that is helpful. All the things I mentioned before about involving your little one in food preparation, going to a food market, looking at books that have got pictures of foods in, all those sorts of things, really talking about food, the color of food, the texture, how it feels, whether it's smooth or bumpy, all those sort of things, talking about food without the pressure to eat it, can really help a fussy eater as well. Okay. So I'm just looking at the questions now and just seeing if we can take one or two last questions. Okay, so my baby is now 19 weeks. Can I give him solid food now or later? Okay, so really good question. So 19 weeks, that's about just 4.5 months. So the recommendations are in terms of when to start weaning, are to start around 6 months. So there is some flexibility in that. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to wait until they are exactly 6 months, but around 6 months is what we advise. But the most important thing is to look for the signs of developmental readiness, that your baby's ready for solids. And there are 4 different signs of developmental readiness. So the first one is that your baby's able to sit up on their own, mostly unaided, so in a high chair. So they can have some support, but mostly unsupported, and can hold up their head and neck steady, because that's really important when swallowing foods. The third thing is that they're able to look at food, pick it up, and bring it to their mouth. So they use the palmar grasp with their fist. And so that's the third sign that you're looking for. The fourth sign is that your baby has lost the tongue thrust reflex. So the tongue thrust reflex is present from birth because it helps with breast and bottle feeding. And that's your baby's tongue just coming straight out. So if you give them some food, or you notice when you're giving vitamin drops or something like that, and the tongue is just coming straight out again, they're probably not quite ready for solids. So look for those signs, 4 signs of developmental readiness. They may be ready at 19 weeks, but most likely you'll probably have to wait a little bit longer. Okay, last question before I go across to Instagram. My 9-month-old has been weaning since 6 months, and I find it very stressful. I'm sorry about that. We're doing 3 meals a day, a combination of baby led and chunky purees or meals, and he eats everything he's given, but just in the last week or so, when I give him finger foods, he started putting the whole thing into his mouth in one go. He used to bite bits off, but for some reason the whole thing is going in now, and he often gets sick. Okay. Okay, so, and then you said you've started chopping things up really small, which feels like a step backwards. Is this just a phase he's going through? Okay, so when you start offering finger foods at around six-ish months, 6 to 7 months, it's really important. There are 3 things that you need to remember. So the food needs to be really, really soft. It needs to be quite big, at least 1 or 2 finger size, and it needs to be this kind of shape, a finger or chip shape, a stick shape, so that when your baby holds it in their fist, it can stick out the top of their fist. So those are the 3 things to remember. So size, shape, and soft or squishable. Those are the 3 things that I always tell people. But by the age of about 9 to 10 months, babies start developing more fine motor skills, and they are able to use their pincer grasp, and that means that they can start picking up smaller pieces of food. So it might be that your baby is at that stage and he's starting to be able to pick up smaller pieces of food, in which case it's absolutely fine to give him foods that are chopped up a bit smaller. It's not a step backwards. In fact, that is the next logical step. Having large pieces of food is important for when they're younger, at least 6 to 9 or 10 months. But if you start noticing that they can pick up things with their pincer grip, then you can give them smaller pieces of food. Another thing you could try is you could cut a little sort of groove into the side of the food and explain to your little one, show them yourself. So role modeling, really sort of exaggerating yourself biting off a piece of food, chewing that, swallowing that, and talking to them while you're doing that, eating with your child, and showing them how you do it is really, really important, just to try and slow them down. Also, only giving them 1 or 2 pieces of food at a time, so they don't have lots of pieces that they can just put in their mouth one after the other, and overfill their mouth too much. So I hope that really helps. I'm going to head over to Instagram now. So if I missed any of your questions, I will be heading over there. And I hope you found this really helpful. It was really great getting all of your questions and really nice to see you all. So I'll see you over at Instagram or otherwise next week, Wednesday. Bye for now.